Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm Jack Richards. I'm on the board of advisors for the department. And I graduated from the program back in 1994. So you can look that up on the internet when that occurred. But anyway, I'm a patent attorney now, and the majority of my practice is on medical devices. But more importantly is I'm going to help moderate this panel that's full of industry veterans from the medical device space. So let me kind of set the context for this panel in general. Then I'll introduce the participants. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I'm going to ask some of the questions you all supplied earlier. So for the context, this is a panel entitled COVID-19 in the Medical Device Industry Outlook, What You Need to Know. We are happy to be Zooming with about 57 of you. I think that's a great turnout, and happy to speak with you on this Friday afternoon. Here's the current state of COVID-19 in which we live. And this is some recent data we just found. As hospitals are overrun with COVID-19 patients, some ambulatory surgical centers and primary care physician practices struggle to keep their doors open. That's not the way I always thought about a medical practice, but it's true. Some are struggling. Certain specialties like radiologists and gastroenterologists struggle to remain employed because of massive cancellations and non-critical surgeries. As such, hospitals are not purchasing surgical equipment and medical devices, and of course that's going to affect all of you here. Medtronic, for example, is showing weekly revenue declines of 60%. J&J revenue is down 30%, and Intuitive Surgical reports a 65% decline in the use of Da Vinci robots. Hospitals are also financially hard hit. Biogen is delaying the FDA submittal of a revolutionary Alzheimer's drug for several reasons. But one is that many of its senior team became sick with COVID-19. COVID-19 has forever changed the US and the world landscape. No industry has been left untouched. As we spoke just recently, medical device is no exception. In particular, the healthcare industry has been profoundly impacted, and that's what we want to talk about today. How is the medical device industry being affected? So, with that background, let's start talking about our panelists. So first, Jill Almaguer. She's a senior project manager in the Information Systems Division at Memorial Hermann Healthcare System in the Texas Medical Center. Kevin Boyle is the Senior Vice President of Research and Development at Becton Dickinson Interventional. Jeff Summers is the Senior Vice President at Quest Medical up in Allen. And then Jackie Havelka is a co-founder of Inform AI, a startup based in the Texas Medical Center. So Jackie and I are more on the startup side. I would probably say that Jeff is more on the mid-sized company size, Kevin's on the large company size, and Jill can probably address the perspective she'll be talking to you as we get into these questions. So, start off with an easy one for the panelists. How would each of you characterize the medical industry in terms of trends and just overall health status before COVID? Right, so before we can see how we're affected, let's see where we were going before COVID occurred.
Well, I can start with Memorial Hermann Hospital System. So we're the largest hospital system in the Houston area, and we were doing very, very well. We have 12 acute care hospitals and over 200 sites when you include all the clinics, et cetera, seeing lots and lots and lots of patients.
Jeff, how about from the mid-size?
I'll add that industry was strong going into 2020. A lot of upward trends, a lot of investment. Everybody's associated with Texas A&M, so close to Houston, but across the state of Texas, a lot of money, a lot of investment in innovation and research, and the medical side across the state. So very strong going into this year.
Yeah, I can echo what Jeff said. I mean, from a startup perspective, lots of interest from investors, lots of interest in new technologies, clipping along at a very nice pace.
So that's the segue to why we're here today. Let's talk about how it is now. How has COVID affected the job market? So let me guide you a little more specifically first. How has employment, hiring, internships, how's that been impacted by COVID?
So I have a lot of HR input from our leadership. Every week we're having a conference call, and some of the ER and respiratory therapists, et cetera, are busy. But there are other people, because we stopped doing elective surgeries, that are having to have their 75% of their pay guaranteed because they have so few reduced hours. So that's been the impact of taking away elective non-emergent surgeries.
And I'll add in there, Jill, that the reduction in elective surgeries was really mandated by the governments. It wasn't the choice of hospitals. We do a lot of business with a lot of hospitals across the U.S. In the hotspots like Ochsner and New Orleans and Louisiana, there were huge monetary penalties and fines and jail times that were pushed out by the state government in Louisiana that said, hey, if you do elective surgeries during this time, there are going to be enormous penalties as well. So there was a lot of not just hospital systems and people taking social distancing measures and the right measures, but it was really government mandates as well.
Well, so, earlier I brought up some of those statistics from Medtronic, J&J, Intuitive Surgical. And so there's a lot of negative, and I think what a lot of the students are looking for is exactly where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. How is this affecting hiring, permanent and temporary, such as internships? If you can speak to that.
So yes, we have a hiring freeze on right now at Memorial Hermann, but it's not going to stay that way, because the good news is diagnostic imaging restarted this week, and next week elective surgeries restart. So I've had a project going on in the cath lab, and it's been an upgrade project that was fairly easy to do because the cath lab didn't have any procedures. But starting next week, they'll start having procedures. So now I got to get my project finished.
Yeah, I think it's probably a similar story. There's so much uncertainty caused that the reaction is to contract and to put everything on hold while we're going through this. But I think once we come out the other side here, we'll get back to business as usual. I mean, the needs are still there, the problems still need to be solved, the patients are still sick. So there's a temporary effect here but the question is how long is that going to last, and how quick will the recovery be? That's the big question everyone's wrestling with now. And once we figure that out, it'll be back to business as usual, I'd expect.
Well, that was the next question I had written on my list. So Kevin, you're not gonna be able to answer that?
I wish I could. I'd probably be very rich if I could. So, I mean, you look at all the reports coming out from, McKinsey and JP Morgan and everybody, they're all coming out with different scenarios about how quickly this could bounce back, and different industries will be different. I think medical will probably bounce back a little bit quicker. Does it bounce back to 100% in Q4, or does it back to 80% or 120%? I mean, there's the whole range in there that everybody's trying to wrestle with. And, will people, we're talking to physicians and they're saying that they're going to be working 7 days a week, and it's going to be 24/7 in the ORs, trying to catch up on the backlog here. But, will patients want to come back? Will they feel safe about coming back? So even if physicians are willing to work, will the patients still come back? So there's just so many moving variables here. It's hard to know exactly how quickly this will come back. And then if there's a second wave, what happens, right? So it's
it's definitely uncharted territory for the vast majority of Americans. It's been decades and decades since we've been in a situation like this, and a lot of what Kevin said rings true. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of conservative decisions being made. A lot of people have put hiring freezes on. I know very few of us, we're still hiring to what's in the budget and for replacements, but we're not actively adding more unbudgeted positions for different initiatives. So it's going to be a hunker down mode. I think as hospitals are going to have their own decisions, with the medical device side, hospitals have put on a hold, visitors in the hospitals. Just because we may be getting on a different side of a curve doesn't mean hospitals are going to start being open for business again as well in terms of interaction with industry. So a lot of unknowns moving forward for sure.
Well, now I was obviously picking on Kevin when I was asking for an exact answer. I know you can't give one. 22 or 23 years old, am I thinking that hiring into maybe my career, am I guessing it's going to slide 6 months, 12 months, or there's just literally no way anyone can even speculate?
Actually, I think it's going to pick up really rapidly because we do have testing now. We have in-house testing for COVID-19. And so all of our patients will get screened coming in. And so if you're involved in any kind of point of care testing devices, then you're going to be very, 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 very busy.
So what about maybe from the medical device industry, more rather than from the hospital perspective?
Yeah, I mean, even within medical device, there's going to be differences, right? So if you're more on the elective procedure side of things, like you were saying with Medtronic getting hit 60%, Boston are heavily hit, J&J's down 30%. I mean, those types of technologies are going to be slower, I think, to recover. If you look more at, infusion pumps and diagnostics and, PICC lines and, those types of more almost on the medical supply side of things as well, I think they're going to see a boom here, if anything, because there's going to be so much increased demand around the testing side of things and the diagnostic side of things, and treatments relative to those. So I think that's where, you could probably target a little bit more. But overall, I think this is probably more of a 3 to 6 month blip as opposed to, 6 to 12, maybe like you were saying.
Yeah, I agree, because the COVID is turning out to be very dangerous for your kidneys. And so dialysis manufacturers are going to be having a lot more orders and a lot more patients.
Well, we were taught, we had our industry board meeting this morning and we were talking about it, that, a lot of it just has to do with the timing and the fact that companies are 1 month into their second quarter. And so unfortunately in that scenario, in that timing, summer internships are often the first to go. And I know, many of you sadly have had internships revoked. And, that's unfortunate. But, hopefully will not be the case next summer either, nor the case in the fall.
Well, it sounds like one nugget I may have taken from that is, maybe if I'm 23 and I had my heart set on one company, I need to realize that the medical device industry is varied. And so some companies or some divisions of companies might be rebounding more quickly. And maybe they might need help in manufacturing. And that may be not what we initially targeted, but keep your eyes open. Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate, and I can tell you from a Quest Medical standpoint, we sell devices into 3 very distinct areas. Infusion, we're busting at the seams. Every device we make is already sold at the moment. We do lots of heart surgery devices. Heart surgery is down 40 to 60% over the last 6 weeks, but it's going to rebound and boomerang back because most people that need heart surgery aren't going home with a medication plan and, exercise and eat better, and then you won't ever need heart surgery again. So again, we're expecting that, 6-7 days a week heart surgery. And then on the flip side, we do some, very elective surgical ophthalmology devices. And we're not going to expect a whole lot of rebound on that, even for the majority of the year. So it's very, very specific to where each medical device company plays in.
All right, well, it seems like, so we're up to about 61 attendees now. Hopefully, most of you have gathered some silver linings from that bit of the conversation. So let's talk a little brass tacks here. Basically, what is the best way to reach employers in this environment? You know, if I've targeted one that I think looks promising, what's the best way to contact them in the quarantine environment?
Well, you can still go online and contact them that way. But I think also through your organizations like BMES and other organizations that might have job posting boards, it might be another way of finding those openings.
I would say be patient. Right now, with the amount of people that are on remote work, it's actually sometimes easier to get a hold of individuals in companies now, since they're working remote and they don't have as much going on in a day of, you know, being in a facility. They're very busy in different ways. Once the remote work starts lifting and people get back to work, there'll probably be a tremendous amount of craziness with people coming back into the facility after being gone for 2, 3, 4 months, depending on how each company responds back. So sometime over the summer when things start getting lifted, there probably is going to be a dark period in terms of communication with many companies.
Let me ask
they will fly you to your interview, so be ready to do a Skype interview and have you know, good background and have your video running, because that's how you're going to be interviewing.
So with our panel being as varied as it is, what are your different views on students reaching out via something like LinkedIn? You might have different views.
Well, I mean, you know, we're a small startup, so we take any and all forms of communication. So LinkedIn, email, website, all of that from our point of view.
So now we had a real good response, a lot of questions from you that were submitted. So let's get to some of those. If we have job offers rescinded, what is our next course of action?
Well, I would say definitely stay in touch with that company, because they were interested in you at one time, and let them know what you are doing and what other classes you did in the interim, and you may get the offer again.
Yeah, I can echo what Jill said. I think it's really important. There's a chart, I've seen it several times on LinkedIn, that talks about, you know, who are you going to be during the COVID pandemic? Are you going to be fearful? Are you going to basically tread water, or are you going to use it as a growth opportunity? And I think, you know, so like Jill said, I think, you know, you be able to tell companies what you did, you know, how you were impacted, what you did, because that's going to tell a compelling story to them that you just didn't give up because something didn't particularly go the right way that you thought it would.
Yeah, for example, let's say you have to volunteer. Well, a great place to volunteer is at Project Cure in Houston. They have a warehouse where they're rehabilitating old ventilators and things like that to go out into service again. So if you can find something that is non-paid but gets you experience, then they're going to say, oh, well, they didn't just sit around watching, you know, binge watching something during their time on COVID.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny that you mentioned Project Cure. We look like we're coordinated. We didn't even talk about it, but I actually reached out to Project Cure this morning and just said, hey, you know, we've got a lot of students. We have, you know, a lot of their internships have been canceled. Let us know what you need. They've been a great supporter of the department in the past, so we'll see. And we'll keep you guys posted. I
would add that, you know, if there are stay-at-home orders, there are shelter-in-place orders wherever you're at, you know, and if you want to go into industry while you have downtime, you know, educate yourself on, you know, I would say 3 different areas. Innovation, so you can talk about things you've read or things you've educated yourself on innovation when you have a chance to interview. If you're interested in The manufacturing side of the industry, get up to speed with technology, looking at the latest technology. I think those are things that you can educate yourself on to be able to answer interview questions and talk about how you focused your efforts during the downtime. Also, leadership. Great leadership books and great leadership education will come through in an interview process once you get there.
So you mentioned reading on innovation and several other topics. Do any of you have specific recommendations on content to read, whether it be a periodical or a special book that could certainly start giving these some of the experience they may have been gaining if they had started work here in May?
Well, one of the things that continues to come up in our board meetings is that a lot of you don't understand all the various types of jobs that you could do with your undergraduate degree. And so I would encourage you to explore that. Look at regulatory jobs, look at quality jobs, look at R&D, all of those different areas. We can certainly, I can't think of a reference right off the top of my head. We can certainly float a couple to you guys.
Are there any technical, I guess, blogs or anything of that sort that you all think are more instructive than others?
So if you're interested in the healthcare information management area, then there's a website for HIMSS, HIMSS, and they have a lot of webinars. A lot of them are free on healthcare information systems, cybersecurity in healthcare, reimbursement in healthcare, a lot of different of those types of things that are free and available.
Well, and I'll say that for me, TED Talks are addictive because there's so many of them out there on so many different topics. And usually behind a TED Talk, there's a book or, additional long articles you can read from the folks that have done the TED Talks. So, and there's so many different topics across lots of different things. So it's a great tool that I use to, really, it leads into just about every book that I read.
Yeah, there's a great TED Talk on grit. There's a book that was written on grit, and basically the premise is that, what makes people successful, and it's not necessarily a lot of education. It's not necessarily, money or financial, although of course those things help. But, this author has found that the one overarching thing is just perseverance and grit. And so you're getting your chance right now to persevere through COVID, but it's a great TED Talk and a great book.
And another book might be something on startups, right? Because if corporates aren't hiring, then it's a great time to start your own business and how to get financed and how to structure a business. All those kinds of things. There are lots and lots of books written on that subject.
Hey, Jill, I need those. You need to send those to me.
Okay, I have one from Don Ball. It's called 1, 2, 3 Launch.
Okay.
Well, and so even if maybe you never thought you'd go to a small company or startup, it still helps to understand that landscape. So from my personal perspective, I did read, as I started moving my practice towards startups, I did start reading general books on funding. And I am not the corporate lawyer. I don't play a role in any of the funding, but I still like to understand the conversations when they're happening. I don't have a specific book on that, but knowing an angel versus a venture capitalist versus different rounds of funding, I think it's intelligent to know, and it certainly beats binge watching, something for the 80th hour. You all have powerful brains, and you're not going to let them sit idle for long. On the IP perspective, IP, what does that stand for? So for intellectual property, Rembrandt's in the Attic, that was a popular book, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, and it's written for the general population, and it probably wouldn't hurt you to understand a little bit about patents and trademarks. You don't have to make a living at it, but if you're in industry, it's probably going to be a little relevant. So those would be a few I would throw out, and you'll have my contact information if you want to follow up on that. Kevin, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, just took a second to get off mute. No, I think they're all good comments there as well. That's a lot of good resources. I was trying to think from the different functions within a company, how to better understand that. That it's a good point in terms of it's a gap in knowledge for a lot of people when they're starting out, and anything to get ahead on the learning curve there is useful. So let me think about it, and I'll provide some references as well after the call.
Well, and I'll throw one other thing in, Jack. You know, we've got some old school engineers here on the phone. Engineering is all about problem solving. So you can hone your problem solving skills in a lot of different ways. If you're downtime in the summer and your job's been rescinded and you don't have much to do, engineers are tinkerers as well. So, I mean, I hate to say this, you know, when I grew up, I'd take stuff apart and put it back together. You know, and you know, of course we didn't have the internet back then, and you know, we had tools, and you know, that's how I, you know, got my love of manufacturing, is taking stuff apart and trying to put it back together. So, you know, there's more than just the internet and, you know, and different technology tools out there. Sometimes you got to go, like I tell my 13-year-old, it's old school playtime. No electronics, find something else to do.
Well, and so from some of my recent work with startups, and this might be old hat to many of the attendees that are still in school, but these Arduino boards on basically how that's helping with robotics, but it seems like what I used to call breadboards on steroids, and just the tinkering aspect of what could you make with that? I mean, could you make a ventilator with your own spare time? Now, look, I'm not saying anyone's ever going to use it, but if I had to interview somebody and I had to figure out what they did with the last 5 months of their time, an Arduino board costs $10. Learning how to program it is probably free. And so I see people on my street that have taken them out and they're doing different lighting on their trees. Why not learn that skill if you don't already have it?
Yeah, I reached out to a contact that I have within the Zachary Leadership Program. Some of you, I don't know, some of you on the call may be in that program. And I asked Seth Sullivan, I asked Seth, you know, hey, what are you guys telling people to do? And they were like, you know, go learn a skill like Jack and Jeff just mentioned. Go learn a foreign language. If you've been wanting to do that and you have the time, you know, go do that. Do self-directed learning. You know, go learn how to program in Python. You know, that's one of my personal favorites, being an AI company. So, you know, but you know, if you're able to tell a future employer, or like Jill said, an employer that made an offer that they're already interested in you, if you're able to say, I did self-directed learning and this is what I did, that's a very, very compelling story to a potential employer.
And some of those hard skills that you might not have had a chance to learn yet, like soldering, was something I needed to learn when I went to work at HP. So get those skills under your belt now. And the other thing that you might consider looking at is programming on an app on a phone. I don't know if you've seen those ads for the little device. It's $89 where you can put your fingers on it and you get your lead 2 EKG out of it, and it goes to a phone app. Those are the kinds of things that when I was sponsoring a senior design project recently, we had a wearable that we needed somebody to design the phone app to get the data out. So any of those kinds of things that you can do while you're off, and you can actually show an employer that, hey, I designed this app while I had this downtime, then that shows you're creative and you can actually get things done.
Yeah, there's a lot of open source, you know, 3D printing designs out there for masks, and the little separators that you wear to take pressure off the ears. And I think Baylor Engineering was mass printing those. So, you know, I mean, hopefully you guys still have somewhat of access to a 3D printer, but you could do things like that as well.
You know, think to make sure we are not taking anything for granted, there are some simple questions asked point blank. Have you had to fire people? Or do you know of other companies that are firing people? So we talked about how maybe some are taking pay cuts. I think we mentioned that earlier. We talked about how sales are down, but we actually talked about furloughs and people losing jobs. That's from your studio audience.
Well, for me, we've been business as usual in terms of hiring and firing. We haven't had to do any furloughs. We haven't fired people other than for cause, which is a bad time to do that. But hey, like I said, business as usual. Definitely know people who have been furloughed though. And you know, people who've moved to new jobs and immediately got furloughed, being there 6 weeks, depending on what industry that they're in. That particular person went to a dental manufacturing company. So the dental industry was, not in great shape the last couple months.
So we had people have to go work from home and take some vacation to get that vacation off the books, which is typical. HP did that years and years ago also when there was a downturn. But some of the people have been tremendously busy working overtime, having no time to take vacation because we had to stand up new isolation rooms. We were very fortunate. We had just opened a new tower in January and moved all our ICU patients over there. And so come February, we had to open up all the old ICU beds and have them ready for COVID patients. So we have had some people tremendously busy.
There's been a push to not lay people off because these capabilities that we've spent a lot of time building up, we're going to need to tap into them. And this is a short-term impact, and we're not seeing it as a long-term. And really, there may be cases where there's furloughs that need to take place, more so in manufacturing sites because there's just an overbuild of inventory because those elective procedures aren't happening. But in general, there's been resistance towards the need to have to fire people. It's more really just let's wait this out, and then once things pick up again, we're going to need everybody.
Well, that's going to be a good segue to this. Instead of letting people go and you're keeping people employed, how has COVID-19 affected the way jobs are being done in your companies? So how has it affected it temporarily? And then how might it affect it permanently? And when you're thinking about how to answer that, the specific question was for people that are hands-on BME jobs.
Well, I can kind of segue from the last question. So, as a startup, and you mentioned funding rounds, we are very, very thankful because we just closed our seed round March 19th. Just, squeaked in. And we are very—
I'll have to ask you for stock tips. That was nice.
Yeah, yes, not my forte. I'll give you the name of our CFO. Yeah, he's amazing. But we're very, very grateful, and we were supposed to be oversubscribed for that round, which we ended up not. Which means you're going to raise more money than you anticipated for a particular round. We ended up not being oversubscribed, but we did close the amount that we expected to close. However, we were supposed to do Series A starting in July, and that is probably going to be non-existent. And so when you have a startup, you're trying to extend your runway however you can. So, we were going to hire 4 people. And now we're not going to hire anybody, and that's a huge impact because we were trying to make the transition from contracting out different parts of projects to hiring 4 people, data scientists and computer programmers to build our own permanent capabilities. And so that's a huge, huge impact. So now we're all of us who are with the company are gonna continue to do, 12 jobs each, which is what you do in a startup. So, that's why I have this huge, large caffeine drink from Whataburger to fuel all of those efforts. But, on the other hand, COVID has provided us a lot of great potential opportunities, because there is about nearly $2 billion with a B dollars of COVID money that has come on board from outlets like NSF, NIH, et cetera. And so we are actually we're looking at actually modifying our current product line to meet some of those challenges. And so we're applying for quite a bit of grant money right now, which hopefully some of that will be successful.
And I've certainly seen that startups pivoting quickly, trying to take advantage of COVID-19 need and funding that goes with it. How about some of the other panelists that are probably in companies that may not pivot so quickly from their main lines? How is this affecting some of the hands-on jobs in your companies now and possibly in the future?
So I can start. We've changed quite a bit, where we've got a lot more of the new product development. So I say new product development because it's broader than R&D. It covers a lot of the functions. New product development associates working from home. And your question was, what about the hands-on type work? So what we've done is, on any given day, there may be about 30% of associates that go to the office now, and we rotate them through. We've got a schedule where some come in the morning, some come in the evening. They're wearing the PPE, they get their temperature checked, and then they go into the lab, and the lab is taped out into different segments. So we're doing everything we can to make sure everybody is safe in that work environment in order to get that work done. But they basically go in, they'll do their build, they'll do their testing, and then they'll go home, they'll do all the analysis and that type of work, and they get out of the office. So I would say it was very disruptive in the beginning, just trying to figure out how do we adapt. And now that we've adapted, I'd say that we're back at 100% productivity working this way, but then we're not 100% effective because we're not able to do everything that we need to be able to do in terms of going out to customers, in terms of doing usability studies, in terms of doing our animal studies, etc. So we're not doing everything that we need to do, but for now, we're able to keep everybody fully busy and fully engaged. And then, as I said, hopefully this passes by fairly quickly and we get back to normal operation and get to those other activities we need to do.
Yeah, and I'll add on a couple things. We put a section of the company on remote work. There was no engineers that went full remote. Our R&D engineers went on a rotate, like Kevin was talking about. One of the things we did was we moved manufacturing to a 7-day-a-week work week by splitting up into an A shift and a B shift, and basically working 24 hours a day, to where we reduced the footprint in our manufacturing area by 50%. And we also separated our manufacturing crews to where if I had somebody on the B crew go positive and I had to quarantine people, I'd have an A shift that I wouldn't have to quarantine, and we may still be at 50% manufacturing capacity, but that was better than zero. So the fallout of that was my manufacturing engineers and my quality engineers went from probably a 45-hour work week to a 60 to 70-hour work week, sometimes being in the building all 7 days a week. Because even though what we were doing on the manufacturing floor was down by 50%, it didn't translate to the number of problems that had to be solved on a daily basis, especially the first, I think we started that on March 9th. And, the first 5 weeks of that was a blitz to get to the end. It was an adrenaline rush just about every day of the week for those crews. So there were major changes in terms of the engineering side. And especially on the folks that were in the building every day, they probably got 5 months of experience in 5 weeks from an engineering standpoint.
And I can give you one more hands-on example. We were training all of our users on the new cath lab systems, and the vendor was doing all that hands-on. And we had the workstations 6 feet apart, but once the additional restrictions happened, we had to stop the training and had to stop the project. But we're going to go ahead and go live now that we have some restrictions lifted. And the trainer who's local, well, not kind of local, he's in Dallas, he can drive here. So we just have to find a safe place for him to stay so he can continue training the rest of the hands-on users.
That round of questions was more on the hands-on. And so we learned how you're doing things in shifts. It doesn't sound like from Kevin that I was picking up any long-term changes. Seems like we're trying to get back to normal. If not your own company, are you seeing any changes that might be permanent? I can kind of get you started. I had never made the conversion to full on digital. I had paper files, and this has been forced upon me, and I think I'm going to switch, and I really don't see the need to pay landlords anymore to be an owner of a law firm. So I think a lot of folks will virtualize that we're slow to do it. Again, I'm class of 93, so you can take that for what it's worth. But I think the remote is going to be far more doable. And I don't know, what are you guys seeing anything that's going to affect you permanently?
Well,
there's going to be macroeconomic changes to the world moving forward out of this. Where we're at with technology and the speed of technology right now, it definitely goes back. My parents were teenagers during World War II, so I grew up in a household, where they were teenagers during the war. And then, the 30 years after the U.S. came out of World War II, there was an enormous amount of innovation and macroeconomic changes in the U.S. and the world. And I think we're going to have something very similar to that, because people have been forced to do things very, very differently and conform to a brand new way of living, and right now with a lot of unknowns. So, it's a similar environment that I think are going to produce similar results. So I think 5 years from now, it's going to be very different.
Before this, I would do a lot of travel. I traveled nearly every week and for different meetings. And we did our board meeting this morning, and we all did it virtually. And I would say we were just as productive as if we were in person. And, I think there would be more of a shift towards the acceptability of doing these virtual type meetings and video calls, and that there really isn't a need to do as much travel as what we were doing. And for companies, it's a lot of expense, right? So you could see a strong push from companies just saying, you don't need to travel. If you don't need to travel, don't.
Yeah, and I think for 2 years, I've been telling my sales guys, I think you can do that training virtually if you have the right equipment and the right technology. And there was a huge pushback. Then all of a sudden, now we're good with that.
Yeah.
Now when a perfusionist calls and says, "Hey, I need refresher training," or "I know we've had the equipment in our hospital for 15 years, but I got a couple new perfusionists." It's like, yeah, we can go out there, but we can quickly do virtual training for 4 hours and be a little bit more flexible. And there was a lot of, well, we can't do that. That's not possible. And all of a sudden, the last 6 weeks, we've moved to that model, and I'm not, that'll definitely be a part of our training model going forward. And it was me beating my head against the wall a lot until the last 6 weeks. So I think that's going to happen, many places. I mean, how many people just from taking a step back are never going to go to the grocery store again?
I am, because I'm out of avocados, but I probably don't count. But yeah, I mean, just to echo what Jeff and Kevin said, that, there are a lot of new technologies that basically people were reticent to adopt, such as telehealth. And, now telehealth is going to, it's here to stay. You know, it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, if my crotchety neighbor who's almost 80 loves telehealth, and we were social distancing across our driveways and he was telling me how much he loved it, if he is an acceptor of the technology, it's here to stay. So, you know, I mean, there's things like telehealth, and I agree with Jeff, the amount of innovation that has already occurred. Of course, we watch AI, we look at AI, and just the amount of AI that has been used, just, you know, applicable to COVID is really astounding. So I think there are a lot of these new technologies that basically, it's a bad situation with the virus, but these new technologies basically got their proving ground, so to speak.
And they ramped up much more quickly. I mean, telemedicine's been a while, but now it's really critical. And I could remote into your computer years ago, but now when I'm doing an implementation, I have the cath lab person at the cath lab remote in, and I remote in, and everybody's remoting in. We're not having to go together to say, is this ready to go live? We make a decision working remotely.
Right.
So there was a question from the attendees that was a little bit different from the perspective I've been taking on these new graduates. These are folks that still have another year of their undergrad or whatever program they're in. And so they've got a little longer runway. And should they be changing anything? Or really will this mostly be resolved and they should just kind of keep along the traditional route? I know I'll start you off as you think about an answer. When I was in law school, the first year of law school grades determine a lot of your clerkship choices. So some people, if they did well their first year, get a nice prestigious clerkship, maybe they take their foot off the gas a little bit because they think that the grades aren't going to matter as much because they've already got their foot in the door. This just again goes to show, keep pounding on those grades all the way to the end because you never know when you'll be interviewing, more so than you would have thought. So there, I stalled enough for you. Now y'all are on.
I'll say that hang in there. The healthcare and the medical industry is going to continue to be strong. If that is where you're choosing to look at your careers right when you graduate, you know, it's definitely recession resistant for sure. As you can see, with many with the healthcare and many medical device companies and folks in the medical arena. If it's slow now, we expect it to pick back up and maybe even exceed expectations for a short period of time while people catch up. So it's going to rebound strong. So hang in there is what my advice would be.
Yeah, I would agree. If you were a petroleum engineer right now, it's going to be much worse for you than if you're a bioengineer right now.
Yeah, I mean, my youngest son is actually a senior at A&M. He's an industrial, and you know, we've had these conversations with him, and we've just said, hey, you know, stay the course. I mean, he had a promising internship. That's not going to happen. So we're basically giving him the same advice as parents that we're giving you guys. And I would say, you know, just stay the course. I mean, one of the things that is likely to happen is there will be, you know, companies that maybe we didn't, you know, necessarily traditionally consider to recommend for, you know, jobs for you guys. And so there are going to be a lot of these new companies that are coming on board proving some of this new technology. And so I view it as an opportunity from that sense. I mean, the other thing I'll say, I noticed Dr. Brewer sent everybody a message about, you know, a job that he had that was just kind of a surprise, and it ended up being one of his best jobs. Last year, I went to an American Heart Association meeting, and one of the panel talks was they had very established researchers and then young researchers at the beginning of their year. or I'm sorry, at the beginning of their career. And the established researchers, almost every single one of them, and you know, I think this is probably true for all of us, is almost every single one of them said their career actually did not take the path that they thought it would take. And there were twists and turns along the way. But when they look back, it was actually so much more enriching than what they ever thought they could do. That, you know, that's certainly true for my career.
And I'd say that medical will remain strong here, and that this is a short-term blip. And if you look back over time, like Jeff was saying, the 01 recession, the 08 recession, you look at the number of hospitalizations that were taking place there, there was no real significant decrease through those time periods. And, you know, this is a robust industry, and I think it'll still remain strong and weather through this storm.
Yeah, one of the
some
things,
new winners, but sorry to interrupt you. There might be some new winners in this space, right? So who you end up working with might be different, but you know, it'll continue to be strong.
yeah, one of the things we're hoping for, just because we're going through both the FDA and the CE mark process right now for our first in the pipeline of products, is, you know, the FDA has actually been very, very rapid at approving, you know, some of these, you know, different tests and different technologies. We're hoping that that actually stays the same, and the FDA can learn to be more nimble and act more quickly while still being thorough. So, you know, hopefully there's promise in that for the industry as a whole. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's some of those macro changes. You know, everyone's going to be asking, well, why can't we operate in this mode all the time? Why can't the FDA operate like this more often? You know,
Yeah.
why can't we operate at a different pace and speed and intensity? And why can't we turn on a dime and be just as competitive manufacturing in the U.S. as offshore? So
Yes,
I'm hopeful that this will also really kick into high gear the strengthening of U.S. manufacturing as well.
yeah, I agree.
Well, you all are quality panelists. You have brought us within 2 minutes at the end of our meeting. I asked you a bunch of leading questions, and it seems like you could kind of feel they were ending up, and you've kind of been summarizing and putting in your final thoughts. But with 2 minutes left, anything else you want to address that we haven't covered yet?
I would just say, you know, you guys stay the course. You know, we have a fantastic industry advisory board. We meet twice a year. We typically meet in person. As Kevin said, we just had a meeting this morning, and this was a big topic of discussion, and we're here to support the department and you guys. We're going to try to do everything that we can to make sure that you have you know, job opportunities, internship opportunities, etc. That's always been our main charge, and we're going to make sure that we help the department get through this small hurdle.
Yeah, Jackie, and every business goes through business cycles and in different time periods. And the reason I chose bioengineering was because I figured people are always going to get sick and they always want to get better. So no matter what's happening to telecom or EE or petroleum or whatever, healthcare is a great place to be.
Yeah, it is.
All right, so as far as I understand it, we're gonna, if we haven't given, oh, we're waving. Hey, Alan, how are you? If we haven't given the contact information for the panelists, that's gonna be provided?
Yes, Maria will be sending a message out with that shortly after this call, or maybe on Monday.
So speaking of contact information, the medium used to network may change over the years, but the need to network never changes. So get the contact information, use it, and best of luck to you all. I don't have anything else, so I'm going to go ahead and leave the meeting. Good luck, everyone.
Great.
Thanks.
Gig 'em.